So hi everyone, my name is Gelila. I'm a medical student at Western University, and I'm also a consultant for Accepted Together. Um, and I just want to kind of introduce myself. And I've been here for at Accepted Together for about, this is my third year now, so I've had quite a bit of experience, and I'm excited to be able to do the seminar with you. So I will advance the slide. Just some important information is that the seminar is recorded, as you probably can see, and I'll be presenting helpful information during the seminar, but I'll be advertising my packages at the very end if that's something of interest to you. And if I don't get through all the questions today, which I assume I will, but in case you have any last minute questions, you can reach out to me on acceptedtogether.com about any follow-up questions. Okay. Um, so yeah, just a bit about me. Yeah, so third year medical student at Western. So I just started clerkship actually like 2 weeks ago. So it's a exciting time because that's like the clerkship is when you're rotating through the specialties in the hospital, so you feel like a real med student. So it's kind of fun. And then I did my undergrad at McMaster in life science, and then I graduated in 2020, and I did a master's in global health, and then it was a 1 year course-based master's. And some of my interests include mental health, global health, mentorship, and increasing racial representation in medicine. Okay. So just a brief agenda for what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to kind of go over the components of the med school application, the timeline. I'm mostly going to focus on your ABS and essays, talk a little bit about references, and then I'll have time for a Q&A at the end. I did want to mention, because I know this is hosted or co-hosted with like McGill HOSA, and so I assume most of you guys are at McGill, but this seminar is more focused on the Ontario med school application. So, and I hope that is something still of interest to you folks. I can try to do my best to answer any questions about McGill, but I'm not very well versed, and I'm not very familiar with the process. But these things I have helped people who I've had helped friends who got accepted to McGill and who are at McGill Med School, as well as like Dalhousie and other places outside of Ontario. So it's kind of still general information, but I think this is more specific to like Ontario medical schools. And you can ask me questions throughout the presentation. You can just put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand, but I will have a separate Q&A as well. So yeah, we'll get started. Okay, so the main components of the med school application, just really briefly, transcript, of course. And I think when you think about the transcript, yes, of course, like your grades matter in your GPA, but making sure that when you apply to different medical schools, looking to see what the main prerequisites or what the prerequisites are to apply to that med school, and making sure that you have those courses. I know it sounds kind of obvious, but like every school is kind of different, and some schools are quite particular about what courses they want you to take. So just make sure you have that. And so the MCAT is another beast, I guess, that's part of the med school application. And you have to kind of request for the MCAT to release your scores through OMSAS, and there's like an option to do that on the portal. So there's also Casper, that's more for McMaster and Ottawa, and the autobiographical sketch and verifiers, which we will talk about, and that is basically, so it's short form for ABS, and that is kind of like a CV of all the things that you've done since you were 16 is the cutoff. And then verifiers are basically the people who can verify that you've done this activity. And lastly, we have our essays, which is kind of the big chunk, and sometimes the most scary part about applications, depending on if you like writing or not. And then I have a section just on others, and that includes like academic explanation essays and pathways. So I'll talk about that when we get there. But yeah, and also it says my internet connection's unstable. So can anyone just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me and I'm not cutting out? Okay, thank you. Perfect. Okay, great. Thanks. If at any point I just you can just raise your hand or put in the chat. Okay. Oop. Okay. I think someone's okay, whatever. So timeline. So the deadline for OMSAS, which is the portal, is on Thursday, October 2nd. So it's a little less than a month. So what I recommend everyone to do when I am kind of consulting people is work backwards. So see all the things that you need to do and kind of, yeah, like work backwards in terms of when you need to get things done. I know it's September 8th or September 7th right now. So obviously like it's not a lot of time, and I'm not sure where everyone is in terms of the application process, or if some of you are not even applying this cycle but you just want to know what to expect. That's also great. Like I definitely did that when I was in undergrad. Like I think I attended talks like this in like second year because I wanted to know what I was getting myself into. Actually, by a show of hands, can anyone, I don't know how comfortable you are with each other and stuff, but is anyone applying this cycle? Just so I know like how I can cater my talk. You can just like put your hand up. Okay, so a handful of you. Okay, great. So yeah, all around this time. The reason why I ask this is because I don't want to say things that I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that to you, because these are more suggestions to like be organized, rather than you have to. Um, okay, so if you were applying to Ontario schools that require essays, so that's UFT, Western, and I think NASM might require essays, you need to plan in advance. So because the goal is you would have your first draft in by like first week of September. Or it's good to have it September 1st, especially if you're applying to Western, because that's like 8 essays. And then you send it to either, if you have friends or mentors that are in med school, that should be your first option. There's also consulting like Accepted Together that you could reach out to for med students to look over your essays and edit. Or I also recommend, if you have like maybe a friend who's either in grad school or who's just like really good in English, or sometimes people have parents who are teachers or anything like that, to review essays. That is also important because you're going to get feedback and comments and edits from these people, and you need time to implement that. And sometimes, like, especially if you're reaching out to professional students, sometimes they take a week, even more than that, to get back to you on the edits. So it's good to account for that. I would also say, when it comes to sending people essays to edit, I would recommend like 2 to 3 people. Because if you do more than 3 people, you will get way too much feedback, and it's hard to like implement all of them, and it kind of gets overwhelming. So I would recommend at least if you can, one person who's in medical school, or who's a resident, I guess, or sometimes if people have parents who are doctors, that can be helpful. The only thing is that it's nicer to have someone who's been through the process recently, because I feel like the applications kind of change like not often, but like if you ask someone who's a physician now, it may be harder for them to kind of like know exactly how to kind of write it, because there is kind of strategies, especially Western and with UFT, like there's definitely a strategy to kind of write these essays. So I would recommend 2 to 3 people, one at least in medicine, and then the rest could be people that you just trust or you think would give good feedback. You should have your MCAT scores by now or soon, so that they can be released. I know there's like a final date where your MCAT can still be cycle, so just make sure. And if you're applying next year thing, just when you're plans, like look to see they have it when you are on the MCAT like application thing, where like it'll tell you when your date will be and when you'll get your scores, and you just have to make sure it's within the time frame of application season. You should at least have your Casper test or scheduled. I I remember you can have the for scheduled after after application is done, so after October 2nd, and it'll just be automatically released to OMSAS. Also, Lilani, I just want to double check if that was a hand from just before, or you have a question now. Okay.
Sorry, it was from before.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so in terms of brainstorming the essays and things like that, I would suggest read over the essay questions, especially for UFT, and I'll talk about this more in the seminar, and Western, and start brainstorming. Okay, what experiences do I think I can talk about that relate to this? to this prompt, or what thinking about your experiences, what lessons have I gained? How did they help me grow? That kind of thing. And that can help kind of with your first draft in terms of what you would like to write. And yeah, take some time to brainstorm your most valuable experiences. If you're not applying this year, but you're applying next year, you can even look at the prompts now just look like, and just you can even like plan in advance. Like that's totally normal. I think I did that when I was in third year, just to know, like I said, just know what to expect. Okay, so now I'll go to the ABS. So it's 30. So this is the thing that's kind of like your CV. It's 30 entries, and there's about 7 categories. So employment, education, volunteer, extracurriculars, research, awards and accomplishments, and other. And so other is always the one that's kind of confusing to a lot of people. It's basically anything that you think is significant or impacted you that you can that doesn't fit in the categories. So like it could even be like some people, for example, I remember one person, she is a caregiver to her sibling. I think she has a sibling with like a special need. And so she was caregiver for like practically her whole life. So she kind of talked about what that the role like that entails and how that has like been important to her. You can do on like if you maybe dance like you don't, not formally, but you dance in your free time or whatever, and you've been doing that for 10 years, you can write about that. Like I had a certificate from like Safe Talks, like it's a certification to provide like, I guess, support for people who are experiencing suicidal ideation. And so that didn't really fit in all the other categories, so I put it in under other. If you go camping every weekend with family and like you something like if it's important enough to you, you can talk about it basically. You just have to talk about it in a way that like they'll understand why you wrote it, if that makes sense. It's a tricky kind of one, but it's definitely it's other is basically the area where you can be more unique and you can really showcase like who you are. um the description for each entry is only 150 characters, which is very kind of difficult, especially when it's your first time applying. It's hard to get the description down to 150 characters. And the next slide has an example. But what I want you to focus on for when you write your ABS is you don't just list what you did. Like, for example, if you are, okay, like let's just say like a TA, right? Or maybe not a TA, maybe let me use an example of a president of like a club in undergrad. Instead of just saying, led a group of 10 people, led weekly team meetings and fundraised for our events. Like that's okay, but something stronger could be manage a team of 12 to create engaging and informative events to help promote awareness for leukemia or something. I don't know, I just made something up. But like you kind of have to talk about what the impact was. And what you want to think about are the CAN med roles, and I'll talk about that in another slide, which are like scholar, leader, communicator, advocates, professional, and I think that's all. I'm probably missing one. And I'll show you the picture in a few slides. But think about those qualities and see how you can emphasize or demonstrate them in your descriptions. And then the next point here, try to have a variety for each category. Oh, so what I mean is like it's 32 entries, but you shouldn't have 10 entries or like 15 entries for just extracurriculars. Try to have some variety. It doesn't have to be equal, but it should be like spread out. But it doesn't obviously have to be equal, like 5, 5, 5, 5. It doesn't at all. And plus you won't have 5 entries for education. Most people will have undergrad. And then if you've done grad school, that's basically what it would be. You wouldn't I don't think you would put high school here. And then show progression in your role. So this is important because some people will be like, oh my goodness, 32 entries. I definitely do not have 32 things that I've done. Well, the good news is that if there is an experience in your life where you have done it for maybe 3 years or 4 years, but you have a different you've had a different role, like you've progressed in your role or in your experience, then that is good. You can put that as three separate entries. So for example, in undergrad, I started off as like a secretary for a club, and then I became the vice president in my third year, and then the president in my fourth year. So those were all three entries that I could put in my ABS. And that it looks favorably as an applicant, because it shows your commitment to your your commitment to that experience or the commitment to that club. It shows that, you have leadership skills. It shows that you were able to progress, and things like that are looked at favorably compared to, like, experiences that are like 1 day experiences or very short experiences. And in your ABS, let me just see, where is it? I'm going to show you this later, but you have to write the number of hours. So like, and you obviously cannot like lie about it. So the more hours you have, the more commitment it shows, which is again a positive. So yeah. The next, okay, I see there's a comment in the chat. Oh, okay, sorry. So I will slides be posted? Not so this is recorded. Um, it'll be uploaded on the website. If that's okay with you guys. So yeah, so it'll be uploaded on the website, this seminar. I'm not sure if the slides alone will be uploaded though. Okay, great. So back to the ABS. So I kind of already mentioned this, but don't just list what you did, but the impact it had. And I'll show you an example in the following slide, because I know sometimes without an example, it's just like, what does that even mean? And always consider CanMed roles and demonstrate them in your activities. So here are the 6 CanMed roles that I mentioned. So advocate, professional, communicator, collaborator, leader, and scholar. And what I did when I was writing my ABS was I had all my entries. And then once I was done kind of writing the entries, I would write, okay, what CanMed rules relate to this experience? And I just kept, and I did that for all 32 entries, just so I can see, okay, am I well balanced? Do I have way too many things that talk about like communicator and collaborator, like working with a team, but not enough things that talk about advocating for others? And so I wanted to make sure I was balanced in that way. And so I can show you an example. This is one example of my entries. So when I was a TA for a life science course. So yeah, so this is exactly what the what am I trying to say? What the, I guess, categories will be like that you would have to fill. So start date, end date, the description, meaning the title description. And I think there's also a character count for that, so it can't be too long. The geographic location, your verifier, so that was the professor of the course. Level of education, I was in 4th year. Hours, part-time, full-time, and then responsibilities. And then so the last one I added myself, and it just was for me to see, okay, what qualities am I demonstrating in this category? So here I wrote, so I was a TA, so instead of saying, the basic stuff that TAs do, marked like lead tutorials, mark tests, you can have it sound a little bit more impactful. So provided critical feedback weekly for students to hone their oral and written communication skills, supported students to meet their academic goals. So yeah, so you see how it like is a little bit more like, okay, what was the importance of this experience? Some tips are, it's good to provide a numerical value if you can. You don't have to do it for every single entry, but like, let's say if you coached kids in soccer, you can say coached 20 kids in blah blah blah, or you can say coached children aged like 10 to 13 in soccer doing X, Y, and Z. But it's good to provide numbers when you can, so it just kind of makes the experience a little bit more rich and a little bit more detailed. Another thing I will say is, when it comes to, this is like a small tidbit, but when it comes to abbreviations, you can have abbreviations as long as they're very common abbreviations or acronyms, sorry, that people know. So like STEM is pretty common, but sometimes people will write like the acronym of their like club that they were part of, and the reader will not know what it is. So like even HOSA, like HOSA's popular, but it's not like super super common. So you'd have to write that out in the description, unfortunately, which takes up characters, which is why I say unfortunately. So just be mindful of that. Um, and sometimes if you don't have enough space to to write it out, you can just give like a short version, or like a short version of what that was, not an acronym, but like saying, instead of saying let's say you were part of a swim, you were a lifeguard for like a really really long name of a community center, you can just say lifeguard, like community, like you don't have to say the whole thing. That's a very like specific detail that I mentioned. I don't now that I think about it, I don't know why, but just in case you haven't heard of that one, just be mindful of that. And also another tidbit for character count is you can use like the and symbol if you're short for characters, like that isn't considered unprofessional. You can also, like when I was really really short, sometimes I would even, like, the space between a period and like the first letter of a word, like here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, I would like take that out. If you're like really really short, you need your, like, you've condensed it as much as possible, like you can't condense it anymore, you can do that. Don't do that for all of them, but if you're really really short, you can do that. um okay, so I think that's all I have to say for this slide. um this is another example, and I want to show you this one because the different categories are different. So you see here it says level of education, then title of project. So this is for research, like the research category for ABS. Title of project, type of publication, my role, and Kanban roles again. Excuse me. So if something is like you're still doing it and it's ongoing, you can say present for end date, or ongoing, you can say description. So this was my thesis project at the time, undergraduate thesis project. So I wrote that. But if you have a research experience where you were published, the description can be first co-author article, um, or second author for pediatrics journal or something. If it's like a third year research project, you can say level 3 or third year research project as the title, or description of the experience. Then the title of the project, so management and treatment of patients with complicated pneumonia at the Children's Hospital. Type of publication. So this is always a hot question or hot topic. So you can write if you intend to publish the research project, or if you're in the process of publishing. So you can say manuscript in progress, intention to publish, research still in progress, whatever the case. As long as you have your verifier who will back that up. So it doesn't, like, you don't only have to write things that you have published, because a lot of people, probably more often than not, don't have a published paper by the time they're applying to medical school. So yeah, so sorry, I'm Melissa.
Hi, sorry, I just have a question. So essentially for my undergrad, I participated in like a research project, and because it happened during 2020, so it was during COVID,
Mhm.
and the like research project completely just halted. So it didn't
Mhm.
necessarily get published, and I think they had the intention of publishing it, but it never ended up happening like at all. So what do you think I can put in the type of publication section?
Okay, that's a great question. So how far did you get in the research project?
Um, Pretty actually not that far because we started out in like January of 2020. Of course, it's horrible timing, but as you know, March 2020 is when
Yeah.
the whole thing happened. So horrible timing, but it's a very interesting project. So obviously I would want to talk about it on my medical school application. But yeah, I was just wondering, like, what do you think I can put in there?
So I would, for me, it would depend on so how far you got in. If it was like you guys got to the data collection part or the data analysis part, I think it's definitely worth mentioning. And I would just say when you talk about type of publication, I would it depends if it halted completely and you don't know where it's at. Even I would maybe try to, if you're still in contact with the researcher, I would maybe just ask to get a clarification. And then in the type of publication, if they said they intend to publish the data, I would just say like intend to publish, like I would just say research still in progress, if that is necessarily the case. If the PI or whoever was like, to be honest, like we don't really have capacity right now, and I don't know if the data will ever get moved on, then I would probably just say, I don't even know if I would. It really depends on honestly all the work that you've done. If you've done a lot of the work, like you've done the data collection and everything, I that's a good question.
Sorry, yeah, just to clarify, we did go through the data collection phase and then we
Okay,
stopped right there because it was a lot of information to get through, as you know.
okay. Hmm. Then I would, oh, that's a really good question. Actually, I'm not quite sure because that's such a unique, like not unique, but like specific thing. And when I applied to med school, it was like I think the year before COVID. So I'm just trying to think type of publication. I would just write intent to publish research in like research in halt, or research has been paused, like something where it's saying that you're in like the like in a research pause. But as long as the intention is to publish and you've gotten to the point where there's data collection and all that stuff, and even if there's data analysis, that shows that like the majority of the work is there. I just wasn't sure if you said, because you said you started January 2020, which is only 3 months before everything happened. So I was gonna say, if you're only in like the literature review stage and everything like that, then I don't think it's like completely worth mentioning, or I would just say literature review. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that clearly like answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. It's also, I mean, it's a very unique project that I participated in. It was kind of like I guess I don't know if I can like privately message you about it later or something like that, if
Yeah,
that's okay.
for sure. For sure.
Awesome.
You can definitely message me. I will at the end I'll show you guys where you can message me specifically so it's easy for you to like find it. But
Yeah,
yeah, you can
sorry, I
definitely.
just don't want to keep wasting time here. I'm sorry, but yeah, thank you so
No,
much.
no worries. No problem. Um but yeah, so I'll just quickly run through this, and then also for type of publication, you can also mention if you did like a poster presentation or an oral presentation. Those are all still super valuable, and that speaks to your communication skills. And even if oral presentation, because I know most of you, like your undergrad years were probably in COVID, so a lot of things were online, so an oral presentation is still valuable. And like I know it can kind of be like discouraging knowing that a lot of your experiences were online, but you're probably competing with other people who are in the same boat as you. So like it should be, somewhat equal. You're not like, for the most part, you're not competing with people who are like who did their undergrad way before COVID for the most part. And then my role. So reviewed 100 plus medical records, identified discrepancies in management of children with complicated pneumonia to improve patient health outcomes. So here it does sound like I'm listing what I'm doing, but at the end I just talk about, okay, why is this important? It's important to improve the patient health outcomes for kids who have complicated pneumonia. So I hope that makes sense, and let me know if there's any questions regarding this. Okay. I just wanted to give you this heads up that you have to have a verifier for every activity that you do, and you can have the one verifier for multiple activities. If, for example, like if you have a professor who maybe was your boss when you TA'd a course, but also your PI, like that's obviously totally fine. So the title would just be what their role is. So it'd be like professor of life science course XX3 or whatever. They're obviously their name, their email address. You have to give the address and city and postal code. So obviously that can be kind of weird. Especially if you have people who you volunteered with like 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So you can put the address of like the institution, or like, so I put like the address of the community center. I put the address of like the university. I didn't put their personal address because that's kind of like, I don't think a lot of people would be comfortable with that. And then their telephone number, and you can just do like, if it's someone at a like specific institution, you can do their extension number and things like that. But the reason why I put this here is because it's important to get this information in advance, because especially if you're reaching out to people you've volunteered with in like first year of university and now you're in like fourth year or fifth year, or if you're reaching out to people in like in high school, right? Like your calculus teacher from grade 11, it's important to get this information in advance. And you have to let them know, or you don't have to, but it's highly suggested because they're like the reviewers might reach out to them. It's highly suggested that you tell them, one, you're applying to med school, and two, what you're going to write. So what I actually did was I would email my verifiers and ask them first if they're willing to be a verifier for this activity. And I would send them like a screenshot of what I'm writing so that if they get a call or an email, they'll know to like what to verify, if that makes sense. So I definitely recommend if you to do that. Okay, now we're in the, how are we doing for time? Okay, not bad. So now the essays point. So the essays is a beast, I feel like, especially Western. But obviously this is not to scare you. This is just talking about maybe how I felt when I was writing it. So for tips, I would definitely recommend, of course, to read the essay prompts in advance to start the brainstorming process. Think about experiences from your ABS that impacted your professional growth and the things that you want to talk about, the things that you want to highlight about you, and think about what you learned from them and how did they make you grow. Think of experiences where you had conflict with a peer or team member, where you advocated for someone or group, where you took initiative, where you problem solved. Like these are qualities that you want to emphasize in your essays because they're qualities that lead to being a competitive medical applicant and succeeding in med school. One tip I use that I tell all my like clients with Accepted Together and anyone I'm helping is go on the CanMed's website. I can maybe show you while I'm actually doing this. Okay, so if you go to CanMed's, okay, you can kind of here look at some ideas for things to talk about or like things to highlight that you've done to show that you would be a desirable for medicine. So let's just look at collaborator, for example. If you go here, it talks about key concepts and it kind of talks about physicians are able to, and then enabling competencies. So work effectively with physicians and other colleagues. Okay. And then look here. So establish and maintain positive relationships with physicians and other colleagues in the healthcare professions, negotiate overlapping and shared responsibilities. What's it, something else that could be useful? Determine when care should be transferred to another physician or healthcare professional. So when you look at these things, think about what are experiences that I demonstrated some of these qualities. Any experiences where you had to work with a team of people who had maybe different roles and how you kind of worked together, et cetera, et cetera. So this will be specifically helpful in Western's essays because Western essays, like their questions, are literally just tell me about a time you showed teamwork or leadership, and tell me the 3 lessons you learned from it and how it will be relatable to medicine. So this is very helpful because it kind of gives you an idea of like, okay, what are things that they want to see from me? I'll show you one more example. Let's say health advocate. Works with patients to address determinants of health that affect them and their access to needed health services. So let's say you had maybe a volunteer role where, you know, or you worked in a community organization for people experiencing homelessness and what you did for that. You can talk about that. Or if you were a crisis support line worker, I forgot what the name is, sorry. You can talk about that and how you had helped identify issues and maybe like, I don't know if you counsel, but like you can talk about the role and how you kind of help advocate for someone. And advocacy doesn't have to, it's not like one picture of what advocacy looks like. It could even be like if you were, like for me, I was a mentor for international students. And they had like a 1 year kind of gap. Like they would come to McMaster and like before they start undergrad, they have to do this 1 year like English learning development program. And you could talk about how, like I talked about how I advocated for their needs to make sure their needs were met and not just their academic needs, but just how they integrated with the McMaster like community, you know, examples like that. Work with a community to identify the determinants of health that affect them. So it can it can be quite general, and you can mold it into your experiences. If hoping this makes sense. I feel like I'm talking so fast. Okay, let me go back to where I am. Okay. And then I would just say, remember the STAR method when telling stories in your essays. So this was, again, a little bit more specific to Western and U of T. When you kind of mention, oh, this experience, like, you talk about your experience and you're like, let's say you start off with the TA thing, and let's say a student was doing poorly in your course and how you help them. Let's say that's the example. Just use the STAR method of the situation, the task, what you did to support them, and then what the result was. So because sometimes when I read people's essays, they'll talk about the situation, task, action, and they'll never ever mention the outcome. They'll talk about how they advocated for the person, how they reached out to, upper year people, stakeholders, their manager, whatever, and then they'll just say that and it'll stop. And I'm like, okay, so what happened after that? So you need the, like, not need, but it's good to talk about the outcome, because then it again actualizes the experience to make sure it is real, the experience that you're talking about. And even if the outcome is not as desirable as you wish it was, you can still talk about what you learned from. Like, not everything you do is going to turn out to be the best thing ever, and you're going to have all these solutions to all these problems. Sometimes it's not going to work out, but again, what you learned from it, how you developed confidence, how you communicate, how you collaborate, all these things. Yeah, so now just focusing a little bit on U of T and Western, because those are the more essay heavy schools. U of T, there are 3 like mandatory essays, so 2 brief personal essays, and I'll show you an example of the prompt, and then 1 ABS essay. And that ABS essay is just talking about one of the experiences on your ABS that you think is most impacted you today, basically. U of T, the difference between U of T and Western is U of T, you can be more creative with your writing. You can be really creative, be really like fun with it. Whereas Western is more of like, they're very explicit in what they want, and you don't have really time to get a little creative. So within U of T's essays, discuss experiences within your response, and make sure what's so important with U of T, because they have their 2 brief personal essays have like specific questions in them. You have to make sure you are answering the question. So many times students will talk about their experience, how it relates to the question or the prompt, but they'll never give a definitive answer, and that is can be problematic. And then Western is 8 essays and then 1 about you essay. The about you essay is not mandatory, at least when I was applying, but I would recommend, if you have the capacity to write another essay, to write it. It's basically sharing just about anything you want about you that, again, it's kind of like the ABS essay, but it doesn't have to be an experience from your ABS. It could be anything in your life that has impacted you and that you want to share with them. So for me, I'll give you an example just so you have an idea. I wrote about basically I wrote about when I moved to Ethiopia, which is where my family is from, for 2 years, in middle school. And I was born and raised in Toronto, and then I moved there, so it was quite different. And I just talked about how that experience impacted me and how it impacted my desire to do a lot of things in my life after I came back to Canada. So I've read essays where people talk about being having a family member who had a very serious illness, or a time where they had a serious illness, or things like that, talking about grief, talking about anything, literally anything. It could be talk about your love for playing a specific instrument, and how that has taught you all these lessons throughout your life, literally anything. So that's why I recommend writing about this essay, because it really showcases who you are. Anyways, okay, so Western, these are the 4 kind of categories: teamwork and leadership, social accountability and responsibility, respect for EDI, and then self-directed learning, problem solving, and critical inquiry. For Western, the important thing is be concise and explicit about why the experience demonstrates the qualities, the lessons learned, and how it connects to medicine. Okay, we are kind of getting short for time, but the U of T essay example, so this is the question for this year, the use of AI is increasingly being used to replace or assist humans in our daily lives. The basis of AI are the complex algorithms that drive the technology. In your opinion, what values, ethical, and societal implications should be considered when developing such algorithms for assessing applicants to medical school? So the reason why I want to put this example is because I want, like, obviously you were supposed to answer the question, but also if you have a specific experience where you think relates to what you want to say about this, you can mention it, and it's encouraged to do so. So let's say if you're going to talk about, um, you know, making sure you have various diverse perspectives when coming up with an algorithm to ensure that, you know, the medicals, to make sure you're looking at medical school applicants like holistically. You can talk about a time where you worked in a group and you realize, you know, there are some voices missing and that you try to be, you know, making your team diverse and blah, blah, blah. So does that give you kind of like a an idea of how you want to approach UFT at least? And you can be very creative. You can bring in research, you can bring in quotes, you can like it's up to you. It's as long as you answer the question and you talk about like at least an experience that relates to the question. Okay, so Western. So this is one of Western's prompts. It looks really long and daunting, but really it's just asking you to talk about, this is one of the prompts for the teamwork and leadership. So please highlight an activity. So one or a maximum of 2 activities that highlight your teamwork and leadership skills. And the bottom is the most important. Please provide a brief description of how this activity demonstrates your teamwork and leadership skills. Outline concretely what you have learned, so 3 items, and how this will be helpful to your career in medicine. So the next slide, I have an example of what I wrote. I only gave an example of one lesson. I didn't obviously give you the example of my whole essay, but I'll just kind of showcase like what the structure is, and then you'll see it's a little bit more explicit and direct than UFT. So here, in the beginning, start off with what the role was, and then how it relates to teamwork and leadership. And that can be like 1 or 2 sentences because you're pretty limited for characters. So first paragraph, I volunteered as the team lead for the inaugural I Rise Conference Planning Committee with 5 other undergraduate students in collaboration with the McMaster Club that was hosting the event. This experience demonstrates teamwork and leadership because I was responsible for leading meetings, managing conflict, collaborating with members, and delegating tasks. One lesson I learned from this experience was the importance of creating trust within my team to ensure that we can rely on each other. By being honest with my team, admitting to when I could not finish something in time or made a mistake, my team was able to see my role as less intimidating, which allowed them to feel comfortable to be honest with me. A physician's role can be seen as intimidating to patients or other colleagues. Being able to be transparent and acknowledge mistakes creates an environment for people to feel more comfortable with you, further establishing trust within your team and your patients. So here, the first sentence is my lesson. I gave an example or how I kind of demonstrated that, and then the connection to medicine and how like a physician's role, blah, blah, blah. So this is just one way to write it. Like I've done multiple different ways within my entire application. So by no means is this like the right way, but I just want to give you guys an idea because I find this helpful when I'm in the process of like understanding what to write. And also, if you're short for characters, another thing I tell my clients is that, here when I say I Rise Conference Planning Committee, whatever, when you on OMSAS, you're gonna have like a title for everything. So the title will have team lead for I Rise Conference Planning Committee. So you can take that out if you're short for characters. That's another small tidbit. Okay. References, I'm gonna kind of go through these quick so there's time for questions. So yeah, 3 references. One has to be academic or employment, one has to be non-academic, and then one is of your choice. You want to choose obviously 3 references who can speak strongly about you. So when you ask, always ask, would you be able to write a strong letter of reference for med school, and try to gauge what their reaction is. If they seem enthusiastic, if they seem, supportive of you, then okay. But if they're like, don't seem like that, then maybe that's an indication that they may not write a good letter. And I also wanted to mention that try to ask in advance, because trust me, especially when it's like professors or like doctors or anything like that, they're so busy, and sometimes they have more than one person asking them for things like this. So they just get, sometimes you fall to the back burner. So it's important that you remind them and all that stuff. And the good news is with OMSAS, it'll tell you when they've like opened it, when they're in the process of it, when they've submitted it. So you'll kind of see the progress, and you can kind of give them a nudge. One thing I actually did want to clarify is the letter of reference is not actually a written letter anymore, or like a typed out letter. It's a reference form, at least for Ontario medical schools. So, and I think it's like they can write some stuff like, how does this person demonstrate X? But it's not a full like letter, which is good because it takes away from like them having to like do a lot of work. And I think if you go on, not I think, but I am pretty sure if you go on OMSAS, you can see what questions they ask, and you can like let your reference know in advance, and you can kind of give them ideas of like what to write about, or not what to write about, but like how you have what you've done in your specific role. So for me, let's say I had one research experience that I talked about from my thesis supervisor, and I just like reminded him of the things I did. Or like my non-academic person was like a kind of like, so I was part of a club for 3 years in undergrad, and she was like the faculty advisor of the club, right? So she was just kind of like that, like I guess an adult who can't kind of just made sure we were doing well in the club, and like kind of supporting us a little bit because we were a new club. And she had some connection to like our mandate, I guess. And so I told her like what I did and what I was a part of, and like how I contributed to the club, to kind of like give her things to write about. And so that's totally okay. And most people really, really enjoy that you do that. So they know what to write about, because like I said, a lot of them are really busy. And always keep in mind can meds. Okay. Okay. This is, I think, hopefully the last slide. Okay. Yeah, this is the last slide. So the others. So these are things that aren't mandatory for everyone to write about. It's based on your circumstances. So some schools will have the academic explanation essay, and that basically is for anyone who maybe didn't do as well as they could have in sometime during their undergraduate career, where they can talk about the reason for that. Like, let's say if they ended up getting really sick in 1 year, or something happened in the family, or things like that. You can write about that in your academic explanation essay. You can also, one thing for people who may not have the GPA of their dreams, I think what I was told is most important is, in first year, let's say you didn't do as well as you'd hoped, right? Maybe you got some like C's or whatever, like D's and stuff like that. As long as you improved over the years, like that is looked at very favorably. So try not to let that get the best of you, because you are definitely not the only one who's had a rough first year and are just bouncing back, or like a rough second year, or whatever the case may be. The second point is some schools have different streams for Indigenous or Black students, because they're like heavily underrepresented in medicine. So now there are streams for them, and I think it's like an essay for either of them. And I know UFT has them, MAC has them, and I don't know if other schools have them. I think Western may possibly have them as well. And then lastly, there's this stream called Access Pathway for Western, and it's for people who had financial barriers upon entering med school, medical barriers upon entering medical school. I'm pretty sure that is mental or physical. And it could also be disability, anything like that. And then sociocultural barriers. So that is, again, for underrepresented students in medicine. And they specifically mentioned Black, Latin American, and Filipino. And so I think you have to write, I believe you have to write an essay for the access pathway, and you just talk about how these barriers affected affected your entry into medicine and things like that. And I'm pretty sure you have to provide documentation for like all of these things. So for Indigenous, for Black, for financial, for medical. I don't know what all the documentation entails, but you can look that up. And one thing I want that is most important about this is the access pathway for Western. The requirements, I believe, are a little bit more lenient than others. So if you apply through access pathway, I think the MCAT's requirements are a little bit less. GPA, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that it's also less. So yeah, and basically the whole point of this is to make sure that the med school student population is representative of the people that we serve. You know what I mean? Like not everyone comes from like a high income family. Not everyone, you know, is well, let me just stop there. But basically they want to make sure that the population is representative. The med school population is representative of the people they serve. So that is why the reasoning behind these things, and the reasoning behind academic explanation essay as well. Like it shouldn't be the norm that you're gonna ace every single year. You know what I mean? That isn't like common. You're like a human being, and people have hard years where maybe they're not getting like a 3.95 GPA. So that is why we have these. And each year I feel like med schools are becoming more and more holistic, which is great. But yeah, so anyways, I feel like I'm talking so much. Anyways, so my packages for Accepted Together, here they are. So you can do a general consultation, which is like an hour, I believe. Yeah, 1 hour. And for any advice regarding the med school application process, I can also help edit like I think 1 to 2 essays within that time frame. I also edit Western essays, UFT essays, and ABS entries. There's a 25 one entry package because not everyone will have 32 entries, and I didn't want to just have a package where you're paying for 32 entries, but you only have like, 20, 25. If you're interested in any packages that aren't here, I always create new packages for people that they don't find what they're looking for here. So sometimes like if you have a 9th essay, I'll have that. Or sometimes people just want me to review 4 essays. I can do that. Up to you. I'm very, very lenient. Also, I understand that applying to medical school is like crazy expensive. So I'm pretty lenient on pricing too if they're not quite affordable for you right now. Like I completely get it. When I was applying to med school, like, and I saw the prices of like, I was just like, oh no, no. So I get it. And I try my best to accommodate everyone I can. So yeah, anyways, so just to go, even if you have a question for me, you can go on Accepted Together. It's like you click find a consultant, and once you narrow it down to like medicine, you can find me. There are quite a lot of consultants, and if you're looking for someone specifically for Dalhousie or for Ottawa, you can try to find them. I think most of us are from UFT or Western, and there's a lot of American medical students as well, which is great. And UBC is also really common. So yeah, you can definitely take a look around, but I will stop myself from talking too much. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have, anything about Western or UFT or anything. Yeah, Saba?
Yeah, sorry, I had a quick question. I sort of zoned out for the part that you were talking about writing about a significant experience, even if it's not on your ABS. Which essay was that for?
Yeah, so that was the About You essay for Western. And so it's not a mandatory essay, but I recommend everyone do it. And yeah, and you can just write about anything that has impacted you, and that you would like to talk about, and you just talk about like how it affected you and why you think how you've grown from it and all that stuff. For UFT, you can probably introduce experiences in the brief personal essays if they're relevant to what you're talking about, but the ABS essay has to be something from your ABS.
I see. Thank you. And also for the academic explanation essay for U of T, does that have to be like a story like essay, or is there like more lenient? What's the structure like?
That's a great question. I didn't write it, but I had friends who wrote it, and I don't think it's like meant to be creative. Like you just kind of talk about, like the question will probably is something like, this is an area for you to talk about anything within your undergraduate career or like any time in your life that has prevented you from performing to your best capability, right? And then you just talk about what that is. So let's say it was like a medical diagnosis in second year, or you got a concussion from playing rugby, and how that blah blah blah, how that affected you, and you just talk about that. So it doesn't have to be creative. It's very like get to the point.
I see. Thank you so much.
No problem. Let me check the chat. You mind to share how to stand out for the application? Yeah, great question. So I would say most of these things I've actually mentioned are ways to stand out, because believe it or not, like not a lot of people, one, answer the question, the essay question. Not a lot of people give 3 specific lessons that aren't redundant. Like, so a lot of these things that I mentioned are kind of ways to stand out. And having looked at quite a few essays like in the past 3 years, it's very I guess what I can say, some troubles people have is a lot of their lessons will sound redundant. Or they don't have they don't have lessons that are strong enough. That like they're very vague. So I would say to stand out, I would say one, think about diverse things that you've done and talk about them. Think about how they've affected you and what you've learned from them and how you think that will make you a good doctor. And it doesn't have to be a lot, like it doesn't have to be volunteering at a hospital. Even if you did arts and crafts with children, you have learned something from that. How did you adapt your communication to speak to children? How did you manage your time wisely to be able to do various amount of things and still do well in undergrad? All of those things are important. Other ways, like obviously like like MCAT and GPA, but those aren't things you can do right now. So I would say essays, that's important. Try to get at least one medical student to review your essays, or someone in medicine to review your essays and provide feedback. ABS, make sure it's concise version of how you why this experience is important. Even if you talk about like I worked at Starbucks like for like 2 summers, and I had that in my ABS, and like you would, and obviously like most people would be like, hey, how is that relevant? But you can still talk about how you demonstrate leadership skills or teamwork skills while working as a barista. You know what I mean? So it's really, sometimes it's not even the things you do, but it's how you write about them, because there are so many people who have incredible experiences, but the way they wrote about it are so vague and so superficial, where it's just like there's no meat, there's no meat there, and it doesn't really show that this impacted you in any way. So I would say think about that. Do you recommend having someone look over your ABS entries, or is the essays more important? That's a good question. Honestly, having someone look over your ABS entries is pretty important, because you don't want it to read like a CV. And like I said, not everyone knows a medical student. Understandable. So I would probably say, even if you know someone like in grad school or someone who's at least good in English, that could be helpful, and I know some of the consultants, like if it is not like financially accessible to you, there are some that have cheaper prices, and you can always reach out to any of us to see if we can accommodate. And like we can always accommodate someone, so I don't want you to be discouraged, but I do think it's important for someone to read over your ABS. Like I had people read over mine, and like trust me, they had some edits for me. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Andrea.
Hi, I had a question regarding the references.
Mhm.
So, since the first one is like academic or employment, let's say I picked an academic
Mhm.
and the second one is non-academic, could the second one be like from my employment? Like, are they really strict about who you pick?
Oh, so you're saying one academic, one non-academic, and the third one's like employment?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine because the third one is up to you. And I think honestly, like that's I think exactly what I did. Like mine was my research supervisor, so academic. Non-academic was like a club faculty advisor, so talking about my role in the club. And the third one was the person like my TA boss, basically, which is a professor. So that's like academic and employment mixed in one. Because yeah.
Okay, so you could have like two academic. Like
Mhm.
your choice can be like a repeat, basically.
Yeah. As long as one academic, one non-academic, the third one doesn't matter. It could be another academic, another non, an employment, anything, a community, like a someone who watched you coach football, anything.
Okay, and just my follow-up was that like who were references you would recommend? So like a professor, someone from your job, maybe like volunteering, someone who supervised you volunteering.
Yeah, so I would say someone's to supervise you volunteering or extracurricular is pretty important because I feel like those are the main people you would put for non-academic. And if it's an experience that you've done for like a year at least would be good because they can like I said talk like they've seen you for a long enough time for them to talk positively about you. And then academic, most people normally choose someone they did research with, or if they were a TA, like their um I guess employer, because their employer would be a professor. Those are the main ones that come to mind. Yeah, like your thesis supervisor when I think of academic. Because I don't know what else it would be really. Um, and then um, and then non-academic, yeah, like I mentioned, um, the community, people in the community who can speak about you. And then employment, yeah, any employment is good. I think the most important thing, honestly, is making sure they speak to different attributes of who you are. So like the research person will speak more to my critical analysis skills, problem solving, that kind of thing about me. My my the person who was my like club advisor, she spoke to my ability to like because it was an advisor for a club for like increasing racial representation in medicine. So she spoke to my ability to work hard, to adapt to different things, to be creative in planning events and things like that. Like all of that and like teamwork too. She saw me work with a team. She saw me be a leader. She spoke about that. And then the person who was my TA, even though TA seems very academic, I TA'd for like a year and a half, and I had a specific instance with her where like I had a student who had like very, I guess, like mental health concerns, and I was like very she saw me display like a lot of like empathy, and she saw me really support different students with their academic goals and their personal goals, and so she kind of spoke to that more like, I guess, like I would say like human part of me. So even though TA like sounds like she spoke to more my like academic stuff, but she really spoke to like my ability to advocate for students, my ability to support other people, my ability to identify concerns and address them, like that kind of thing. So that's how I would think about your reference is like, no, don't just think about the category academic, non-academic, but just think about what you want them to speak to show like a full picture of who you are.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. If no one else has a question, I have another one. But it's regarding Casper. I know you didn't really talk too much about that, but
Mm-hmm.
would you recommend getting a tutor for Casper?
That's actually a really good question. Okay, so I will give you guys just some background information. So I did the Casper, did not do well, like not even close to doing well. Like I didn't see my score, but like I don't even think I finished like some of the questions, and that's because I'm like an extremely slow typer. Like I can't type fast, and it was mostly because of the like how fast I type rather than like the prompts, because the questions weren't hard at all. It was literally just being able to type quickly. So with that being said, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this, but I don't know how much they could help you with that. I really think Casper is more like, it's more of like just to see how you display empathy, how you problem solve. It's not like studying English or studying Orgo. I would recommend like you could maybe get like like maybe set up one meeting with someone who's done Casper for them to share their tips and tricks. But I wouldn't invest too much in that. I would also, what would really, like, my main tip would be, if you don't already type fast, like really just practice typing fast, and like just practice, practice, practice. And I'm pretty sure you can find like Casper questions online and just practice doing that with a timer. Like I think that would be more helpful than a tutor. But that's like my 2 cents. I'm not super, like, Casper is not an area I'm very comfortable with when it comes to mentoring someone on. So I want to just take what I said with a grain of salt. But I think just getting someone to share tips and tricks, sure, you can also find that online, and then maybe practice a little bit, and then see if you're still struggling, then maybe reassess, and then see if you would like a tutor.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. You've helped a lot.
No problem. I'm happy to help. Does anyone have any other? Oh yeah, Melissa.
Hey, so yeah, so super quick, just going back to what we were talking about earlier. So I just want to give you like not to take up too much of your time, but I just want to give you a brief kind of overview of what I did. Essentially, like I graduated from a kind of a unique program, and it kind of helped me how do I say this? It helps me with like, or help me, I guess, be more familiar with like diagnostic imaging. So I'm really good at interpreting ultrasound and whatnot, and I actually work in ultrasound right now. So the project was more involved with like, essentially, they wanted to develop. It was like a collaborative project. They wanted to develop a algorithm using artificial intelligence and to assist radiology with like diagnosis of like joint effusions in hemophilic patients. It's very niche, so that's why I really want to talk about it on my medical school application, because I just thought it was very interesting, and I was very happy to be a part of that project, but unfortunately it got shut down quickly. So yeah, that's essentially what the project was about. And again, like it started in January 2020, and they didn't know obviously that all of these things were happening in like March. But the ultimate like goal of it was like for an algorithm to come out of it, which is really funny because the prompts of U of T was about AI. So
Literally.
that was
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna kind of like tie it back to that. But yeah, yeah. So it is a very like, how do I say that? It's very niche. Like it's very specific. I really struggle to like include it in my application because I literally don't know how to include it, but I definitely don't want to not include it because I think it's very fascinating, and I think it's a good reflection of like myself. And we also like included a lot of like group work, and yeah, so yeah, and again, it never ended up happening like in or completing, and that was back in 2020. So I really don't know what has happened to that project. It probably just like stopped because they were concerned about COVID. So
Mm-hmm.
um
Okay.
so
Okay, that makes more sense now. So I definitely agree with you that you should definitely include it in your application. It sounds really interesting and like so applicable too. So I would say for the ABS specifically, if if you like have like kind of don't know what happened with it, or don't know like whatever, and you don't really talk or communicate with the people now, and you think it would like it's been so long to reach out, that's fine. I would put it under, instead of like a formal research experience, I would put it under like, if it was, depending on whether it was a volunteer, extracurricular, or like if you it was during this, no, you said it wasn't during the summer, it was during January, but if it was like an employment thing, I would put it under there, because then you won't have to talk about um the like intention to publish thing. However, you can still, that's one option, and that is not a bad idea at all. You can also add it to research, like put it under research still, but for type of publication, you can just say um like, I would just like, I don't know the exact word, but I would just say um data analysis completed, like, or like research, like, I don't, if it's not in progress at all, it would be a lie to say it's still in progress. And you can't really say intention to publish if you don't know if they're actually going to publish anymore. So I would just say data analysis complete, research has been, can you reach, are you sure you can't reach out to the person? Because I would just, because if you can say research still in progress, that would be good. Because if you just say research has halted, with no explanation, it's kind of like weird, unless you say research has halted due to COVID. But I don't know if that is something you can I really don't know. I really don't know. I think you should include it, but it's more of like I just don't know what wording to use.
So very good feedback. I was thinking of, like you said, saying like analysis completed and then saying like slash or like dash research halted due to COVID-19, perhaps.
Yeah, due to COVID-19. So they know that you like, and then when you write what your role was, you can talk about everything you did, and then they'll understand, like they'll obviously understand. You're definitely not going to be the only person who's in this scenario. But yeah, so I think that's totally fine. And then you're gonna have to have a verifier. So you can just send that to your verifier as well if you want, just to make sure like everyone's aware of what's going on. But yeah, I think that's the research, like that you say data analysis complete research halted due to COVID-19 or manuscript halted due to COVID-19. Since it's mostly the research is done, it's more like the writing process.
Yeah, essentially that's pretty much yeah, that was like the progress of it. But yeah, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your
Yeah, of course.
advice.
No problem. Okay, any other questions?
Actually, sorry, me again, if no one else has a
No
question.
problem.
Do you think I should talk about this? Well, I did kind of mention it as well in my like UFT prompt, just because like obviously it relates to AI, like that's literally the perfect fit. But I was just wondering, like, how do you think I could like use that to answer the question?
So I would say so the question's asking like what values should be used in algorithms. So first I would lead with like whatever you think, like whatever your answer is to the question in terms of what you think are the main considerations when it comes to creating an algorithm for assessing medical school applicants. Then you can introduce your experience. Similarly, I was an ultrasound technician for X when to develop this. And then you can talk about what you guys had to consider when developing that. And you can like the lesson, if whether the lesson is working with different perspectives to ensure that you gauge everyone's perspective, or maybe it's about making like creating an algorithm is an iterative process because there's always kinks and things that you have to fix. That could be, it really depends on what your answer to the question is, and then you'll kind of cater your experience to that, if that makes sense. So if your main like theme to answering the question is about making sure that different perspectives are being heard so that they're assessing medical school applicants fairly, you can relate that to if you had to do that for your role. If your main theme is about making sure that if they're going to create an algorithm, making sure that it's an iterative process where you're constantly implementing feedback, you can talk about how you did that in your ultrasound role. If your main thing is those are my two examples really, because I don't I'm just glad I didn't have this question because I'm not the most like well versed in this kind of stuff. I like the empathy questions. So that's kind of how I would do it. I would introduce your experience and then relate it to how you're answering the question. Does that make sense? And if it doesn't, it's okay. You can be honest. I can figure out another way to explain it.
No, no, absolutely. You make perfect sense. I really appreciate this. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
great. No problem. No problem. Okay, any other questions? And obviously, if you don't have questions now, you can reach out to me on Accepted Together. But if no one has questions, I will let you guys enjoy the rest of your Thursday night. Good luck with applications. Honestly, it was a very stressful time for me when I was doing this. So if you're going through that right now, it is normal to feel that way. And if you feel like crying sometimes or like feel like wanting to throw the towel, that's also normal. But you will get through this. You will make it on the other end. You just got to keep working hard and keep believing in yourself. And once the applications are closed, you can take the break that you definitely deserve. But yeah, good luck. And hopefully, we'll be colleagues in the future if or when you get accepted to medical school. So yeah, have a good rest of your night, everyone. Oh, there's a comment. Okay, no, I think there's what do you think about the great answer for Casper? What does oh, what do I think is a great answer for Casper? Like I mentioned, I'm not really the best when it comes to Casper. And honestly, I'm not the right person to ask what are good answers for Casper. Let's just say that because I didn't even have time to get there because I think half of the questions I didn't have time to answer. But I think if you search it up, there's kind of ways to answer Casper questions. I also heard Doing Right is a book that you can read that talks about like medical ethics that you can, and it talks about like autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, and like get familiar with those concepts so that you can apply them with your Casper answers. But that's kind of how I approached it because I didn't do it well for the score. Just wondering for like how to answer. Yeah. I hope that answers your question, June. Also, how long will it take for the video to be uploaded? Honestly, that's another great question. I'm not really responsible for that, but I think like a week. I'll try to I'll let the person who's uploading know that we would like it rushed hopefully, and hopefully it'll be shorter than that, but I think a week, and it won't be uploaded to YouTube, but it'll be uploaded to Accepted Together if that um if that's helpful. And June, did I kind of answer your question? Sorry, I'm not the most well versed in Casper.